As some of you might know, my December vinyl haul is my chance to discuss all of the non-metal vinyl purchases I made during the year. 10 albums this time, and some pretty good stuff here, so if you are wondering what it is I listen to that isn't necessarily metal, and you want to see some vinyl, then here you go. First up is the second EP from American and otherwise death metal band Blood Incantation. This is Time Wave Zero, released in 2022 by Century Media Records. Of course, Blood Incantation is normally known for blistering sci-fi death metal, but here we get, shall we say, an entirely different beast. This is the band's foray into ambient music, comprised of only two compositions, Io and Ia, each divided up into 4 movements, so one could consider these either 2 tracks or 8 tracks, depending. Most of the ambiance here is handled through synths, providing swirling atmosphere, distant electronic murmurs, and low tonal backgrounds. It's fairly dark at times as well, but also expansive and immersive. Each movement also builds upon the previous one, yet still remains in its slow and ominous state. Also, no vocals here, but that's to be expected for this genre. As for the vinyl, it is 1 LP orange transparent. Right there. Right there. The album also came with a CD, in case you like those kinds of things. We also get a gatefold jacket here, picture of the band, finding some inspiration in the great outdoors, no doubt. As for favorites, definitely the third movement of each composition, which are basically the crescendos, if you will, to their respective pieces. Well, maybe crescendo is a bit too dramatic of a term, considering that neither composition really goes above its languid tempo, but it's clear that the first and second parts build to the third and then come full circle in the fourth. The band has actually planned on doing this kind of EP from their very first rehearsal, so this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment idea. They also plan on following up this EP with a return to metal, in case anyone was worried about that. As for this EP, it certainly falls in place with their sci-fi leanings as a sort of related soundtrack. It certainly has that cinematic feel to it, as if it could have easily served as a sci-fi horror movie score. Definitely not for everyone, but as a fan of both ambient music and score soundtracks along these lines, I really enjoyed this EP. Speaking of the band, and well as some of the stuff that might be influencing them, Blood Incantation are on a recent episode of What's in My Bag, which can be found at the Amoeba Records YouTube channel. The guys discuss their record purchases at Amoeba, much of which in the ambient and electronic territories. So if you like Time Wave Zero, you should go over to that video and maybe check out some of the albums the band recently bought. Pretty cool stuff. And just to say, I'm fine with this being an official Blood Incantation release, and not relegated to a side project. I suppose some consider this a rather gutsy move for them, but that also implies that the band has to always stay within its established parameters, or else. Thankfully, they didn't do that. But if you have an opinion on this record that runs counter to mine, let me know in the comments, because I'm always willing to hear different takes on these kinds of recordings. Next is the debut album from American industrial electronic band the Electric Hellfire Club. This is Burn Baby Burn, originally released in 1993, but now released for the first time on vinyl in 2022 by Cleopatra Records. So I do realize that this band gets lumped in with the industrial metal that came out around the same time, but for the most part, the metal isn't really here. I mean, there's an industrial element throughout, but kind of laced with groovy dance beats and synths. It's heavy at times, but again, not exactly metal. As you could imagine from the band name, the lyrics tend to settle into the subjects of Satanism and serial killers, but also sex and sin. You know, the fun stuff. Also, lots of movie samples thrown in. Vocals on this one are drenched in reverb and distortion, but very listenable still. In addition to the original 9 tracks, now remastered, you also get 7 bonus tracks on this release. Satan's Little Helpers and Baptized in Blood are here, as well as remixes from both this record as well as their follow-up album, Kiss the Goat. Vinyl variant for this one is 2 LP orange. There you go. Also, we do get inner sleeves here. We get some liner notes, but we also get full lyrics as well as an explanation about each and every track from the band. Further on the second inner sleeve here, same thing. Pretty cool. Also get a gatefold with rare, never seen before photographs. I think a few of these look familiar. Maybe the photo shoots look familiar, but these are different takes from the same shoot. Pretty cool. It's nice to see these photos again. I haven't seen them in a long time, or these shoots rather. As for favorites, definitely The Age of Fire, as well as Where Violence is Golden, and Mr. 44. And speaking of Mr. 44, there is a music video for the track. You can do a search on YouTube for it since it hasn't been released to the platform in any official capacity, which is a bit of a crime. I think fans of 90s gothic electronic music would dig this record, but also those who are into the dancier side of industrial music, albeit with a dark side. Overall, it's a strong debut release that I've dug since it came out. And since this new edition is available, I also wouldn't mind if Cleopatra gave the same treatment to the band's second album, Kiss the Goat, another record I would also highly recommend. Truthfully, they're two albums that go well together, so you should check them both out when you have the chance. Next up is what I can guess is the fourth studio album from American horror punk band The Undead. This is 12 Hits Uncovered, originally released on digital format in 2007, but now released on vinyl in 2021 by No Balls Records. Great label name, by the way. So this is a cover tunes album of sorts from ex-Misfit guitarist Bobby Steele, along with drummer Joel Gostin. Moreover, it's the Undead's redo of the Misfits' lost 1980 album, 12 Hits from Hell. Steele was in the Misfits in 1980 and is on that original recording. According to Steele, instruments and equipment used to record this new version were also used on those August 1980 sessions, so fun fact there. Production on this one is fine, notably for the fact that this is punk rock we're talking about here. Steele does perform everything here but the drums, and really did a good job overall. Tonally, you do get a bit of a Misfits feel here, though the performance seems a little more restrained in terms of aggression compared to that band. Still, very listenable and always cool to hear Steele play on a record. As for the vinyl variant, it is 1 LP Classic Black. It is limited to 300 copies and is considered the second pressing. Mine is also autographed here on the front jacket by the drummer. The first pressing had a different cover, was limited to 138 copies. Get it? 138? Yeah, nice reference there. Anyways, my favorites are Skulls, London Dungeon, and Where Eagles Dare. Cool tracks. In fact, nearly all of the tracks are worth hearing, though the album ender Halloween 2 does lack quite a bit for me. But that's only one song, and it's not a total loss as it stands. It's fine, but the rest of the album is considerably better. So this is a fun recreation of some classic Misfits material done in part by someone who is actually there. Good on Bobby Steele for sharing his take on this lost album, which you should check out if you have some interest in Misfits history and or fondness for these tracks. Next is the debut solo EP from Metallica guitarist Kirk Hammett. This is Portals, released in 2022 by Blackened Recordings. So if one were to find out that that guy from Metallica put out a solo record, the assumption might be that it would be at least somewhat sounding like Metallica, but that's not the case here. Rather, we have an instrumental record showcasing various cinematic elements, reminding one at times of soundtracks from Morricone, Carpenter, Elfman, and Williams, but interspersed with some metallic sensibilities as well. And oh yes, there will be wah pedal. Plenty of wah. Speaking of which, there are guitar-centric moments on this record, with Hammett bringing in some slow melodic moments, occasionally broken up with heavy rock riffs. Some of the remaining heaviness here is perhaps surprisingly brought by the orchestral elements, which are led by composer Edwin Outwater, who also conducted on Metallica's S&M 2 record. As for the vinyl variant, it is 1 LP Ocean Blue. It is limited to 6,500 copies, according to the Record Store Day site. As for favorites, definitely Maiden and the Monsters, pretty cool. Also, The Incantation. If you're looking for music videos, there is one for the track High Plains Drifter. You can check that out at the Kirk Hammett YouTube channel. Now for me, this EP sits squarely between my love of heavy guitar work and score soundtracks, particularly the ones which clearly inspired Hammett on this record. And while you can still hear some classic Metallica guitar moments, this isn't Metallica. Because of that, I do wonder how many will buy this record based purely on fandom of the band versus those who have a sincere draw to material like this. However you get to this EP, I would recommend that you do because it's absolutely well worth the listen. Next up is a reissue of the second studio album from American gothic rock band Shadow Project. This is Dreams for the Dying, originally released in 1992, but now released on vinyl for the first time in 2021 by Cleopatra Records. So before I get to the good stuff, here are the complaints. Since I have this on CD since its release, I'm used to the album as is. What we have in this edition are 2 tracks that are missing, the song order is rearranged, and Static Jesus is replaced with a later acoustic version. I also caught at least one edit that needlessly shortens a track. So in other words, this isn't going to be the original version of the album, and I really don't understand why this was done. To be fair, the 2 tracks that are missing, such being Holding You Close and The Circle and the Cross, aren't exactly the strongest songs of the record, but I'd still prefer them to be there. They were likely removed due to time constraints, since this is a single LP, but Cleo could have also went with a 2 LP set. Since they did not, this might have been a way to cheap out on the release. So, a bit of background here in case you don't know about this band. Shadow Project was a band formed by ex-Christian Death members Roz Williams and Eva O. Speaking of which, there is some musical overlap between the 2 bands, though I generally prefer Shadow Project for its less punky, better produced, and more evolved approach to darker music and lyrics. It's fair to say that Shadow Project is at times a bit more experimental than its precursor band, so with all of that factoring in, it's probably the reason why I really love Shadow Project a little more than Christian Death. But you know what? Christian Death is fine too. Why not? Anyways, vinyl variant is 1 LP purple and black splatter. And not a big complaint here, but it is curious that Cleo steered away from the band's consistent use of green in all of its album covers and decided instead to go with purple. Not sure why. If someone at the label sees this video, maybe they could explain to me why this decision was made, because I just don't get it. Anyways, favorites on this one are Days of Glory, as well as Zaned People and Night Stalker. Given the differences between this edition and the original release, it's difficult to call this new one a straight reissue at all. Overall, it might have been better to name this something else because it is a tad misleading to refer to it as a reissue, but getting past that, I'm glad to have at least something else from this band, but I'd rather have the original album pressed to vinyl, at least one day. So you know what, Cleo? Get on that. And before I wrap this up, I did want to show the gatefold. It is the lyrics, in case you want those. So yeah, Shadow Project. It's kind of the same record, but different. Next up is a live or sort of live album from American hard rock band Aerosmith. This is 1971, The Road Starts Here, released in 2021 by Universal Music Group. So this version is the original first release from Record Store Day, Black Friday of 2021, which means it was later put out on CD in 2022. Basic story is I ended up getting this vinyl version a bit late because I had a friend wait in line for RSD to get it for me, and then it took him a few months to meet up to pass off the copy. So for me, it's a 2022 acquisition, just in case you needed all of that. As for the record, this is pre-Columbia Records signing for the band, dating back a full 2 years before the first album was released, and 1 year after their formation. It's a less refined Aerosmith, a bit more stripped down and bluesier, and with a bit less punch than the material they're better known for going forward. Some early versions of lyrics are present here, which might throw you off a bit if you're more familiar with the final studio tracks. My guess is that this is either a rehearsal tape or a sound check, so its production, or lack thereof, wouldn't be up to snuff with more professional jobs. Likewise, some of the playing is a little sloppy, and Tyler's voice cracks at times. That's kind of expected in any band's early days. Vinyl variant for this one is 1 LP Classic Black. It is limited to a whopping 10,000 copies, so not that limited. There you go. Also, we get an insert here. It's kind of looks like the old master tape labels there, done on an inner sleeve. There you go on both sides. We also get an insert here with an article / interview segment by David Frick. David is the editor of Rolling Stone magazine. He was a music journalist throughout the 70s and on. Some cool stuff about the band, different band members talk about these days, as well as a track-by-track explanation of each song. Pretty cool. Also, we get a gatefold, early pictures of the band for you. As for favorites, definitely Movin' Out is pretty cool, Dream On, and Mama Kin, but especially Dream On. This is a killer version. It's really cool to hear. Overall, I'm feeling that the second side of the record is noticeably stronger than the first. Perhaps because this is an unrefined incarnation of Aerosmith, fans will either take it or leave it. It is an excellent audio snapshot of where they were, but also where they would go in the not-so-distant future. But if you're expecting a fully realized version of Aerosmith, you should look elsewhere. Otherwise, it's a cool addition to the collection for those hungry for raw and fledgling material from the bands they like, including this one. Next is the third solo album from American comedian George Carlin. This is Class Clown, released in 1972 by Little David Records. So before I get to Carlin, I wanted to briefly chat about Little David Records because there is a story here. The label was founded by comedian Flip Wilson, who was doing well but wanted to do riskier routines. So he formed this label to showcase that material, but he also did it for other comedians who might be, at that time, a little edgy. Incidentally, the David in the label name is the biblical character who goes after Goliath, so there's an analogy there for sure. One of those comedians was definitely George Carlin, who at this point was starting to steer away from the safe comedy into more of the countercultural stuff. That aside, let's talk about Class Clown. In addition to some of the goofier material Carlin was known for at the time, he also does bits on his youth and religion, as well as his fascination with taboo subjects, not the least of which, foul language. And if you're wondering at what point Carlin drops his first recorded F-bomb, it's this record, which ultimately prompted some government harassment the following year. The album is even dedicated to comedian Lenny Bruce, under his real name Leonard Schneider, who pretty much opened the door for comedians who work blue, to use a term. Vinyl variant, as you could well imagine, in 1972 is 1 LP, classic black. We also have an insert, actually an inner sleeve. More shots of Carlin here, with some funny stuff written on the chalkboard in the background. Also comes in a gatefold jacket, pictures of Carlin, some notes, and all of that. Favorites on this one are Class Clown, great routine, also The Confessional, and of course, 7 words you can never say on television. The last of which was a routine that got Carlin arrested no less than 7 times for obscenity. So overall, a good mix of Carlin's goofball stuff and his edgier material. It's definitely 70s Carlin. Of course, later on, his material gets a tad more misanthropic and critical. I like both eras for him, and although Toledo Window Box is likely my favorite 70s Carlin record, Class Clown is a very close second. It's also a good representation of his comedy at the time in general. Check it out. Next up is the second solo studio album from American hard rock musician Paul Stanley. This is Live to Win, originally released in 2006, but now unofficially pressed to vinyl in 2020. So the elephant in the room here is that this album really does dabble in both classic and modern sounds. You'll certainly get the Paul Stanley songwriting you've come to expect, but there are times where the record suffers from trying to jump on then current trends of instrumentation and production. I'm hearing electronic drums and that whole singing through a tube sound, but also some detuned chords, synth effects, and backing vocal styles throughout the album that really tie it to the 2000s. I mean, it's not like Kiss never did the bandwagon thing, and I'm definitely thinking about Carnival of Souls here, but I don't feel these elements were necessary for what is otherwise a pretty decent record. The album itself is self-produced, though Paul does bring in longtime collaborator Desmond Child, who gets co-writing credit on half the tracks. Likewise, John Five shows up for a couple leads, and Kiss alum Bruce Kulick, who for some reason plays bass on a few tracks, which makes the absence of Simmons here rather interesting. In fact, there are a lot of collabs going on here, just so you know. Anyways, vinyl variant for this one is 1 LP gold vinyl. There you go. Same on the back. We also have an inner sleeve with a duplication of the record jacket for some crazy reason, as well as the title of the album again, in case you needed it. Favorites on this one are definitely Live to Win, Bulletproof, and Where Eagles Dare. All three tracks pretty cool. I probably like Live to Win the most. You know, you put a gun to my head. Sure, why not? Anyways, I should also mention that Paul did a club tour for this album, from which this DVD came out. It is entitled One Live Kiss. Material on this one was from Live to Win, as well as his 78 solo album, and some Kiss favorites that he wrote. It's a great show, and I've watched this a number of times. In fact, I might put it on again later this week. One thing I did notice is that Live to Win material really improves in a live setting, but that also means that it isn't bogged down by modern productions. So there you go. And again, this album is not an official release. Let me stress that right away. This copy is Japanese. In fact, there's the Obi strip for you. There are also unofficial pressings from Europe as well as the United States. Of course, I'd rather own a vinyl copy of this album from a legitimate source. I don't know, was Stanley not confident enough in this release to have it pressed to the format? I mean, it did peak at 53 on the Billboard 200, so it didn't do that badly. Regardless, an official release would be nice. Overall, I like this album despite its weak moments. I mean, I've always appreciated Paul as a songwriter, and there is enough here that satisfies that appreciation. And since I don't believe Paul is going to do another rock solo album going forward, this one will have to do. Give it a chance. Next is the debut album from French synthwave band Perturbator. This is Terror 404, originally released in 2012, but now reissued in 2017 by Blood Music. So Perturbator is a one-man synthwave project led by James Kent, whose music is steeped in 80s cyberpunk culture, but also VHS trash cinema from the decade. And although it's driven by synthesizers, samples, and electronic beats, there is something undeniably dark and heavy about Perturbator, or Perturbator, take your pick. You know, it's funny because even Kent has jumped around back and forth on how you say his own project name, even within the same interview. So I don't blame some of you for not knowing how to say it, because even I don't know how to say it from day to day. Anyways, I can also imagine the music here fitting well with some sort of retro-themed video game, preferably one that involved driving. I don't know, maybe one of the GTA games. Definitely seems like a perfect fit. Anyways, vinyl variant on this one is 2 LP Classic Black and limited to 500 copies. There you go. Also comes in a gatefold jacket, some cool art, and some meager credits down there in the corner. Favorites on this one are Savage Streets, as well as Nightmare Interlude and Shadow Force 84. Speaking of which, I love the titles on some of these tracks, including Linnea Quigley Horror Workout and John Holmes VHS Nightclub. There's also a track called Excalibrate, which I kind of dig because it's the name of the protagonist in one of my favorite B movies of the 1980s, such being The Dungeon Master, or Rage War, if you prefer. Incidentally, Wasp is in that movie too, so you should totally see it. So, while not for everyone, if it would be for you if you dig the darker end of synthwave, or maybe cheesy synth-laden 80s soundtracks, or cyberpunk themes in your music, any of that would probably do it for you. Of the Perturbator albums, or Perturbator albums, this is definitely up there for me, though the Uncanny Valley is still my very favorite. Definitely check out both of those albums, if interested. Next up is the debut album from American band The Lord. This is Forest Nocturne, released in 2022 by Southern Lord Recordings. So in case you hadn't heard about this one, The Lord is a bit of a solo project by Greg Anderson, best known for his work with Sun, and no, not Sun-O as some mispronounce it. And although there is a little overlap with that band, The Lord differentiates itself with its creepy and cinematic elements, pulling from composers such as John Carpenter and Bernard Herrmann, but in a sludgy, doomy delivery mixed in with the synth orchestration. At times, it's either rather ambient with droning organs and atmospheric sounds. I mean, I can easily imagine someone putting this record on during a Halloween party or something similar definitely. And like the Aerosmith record, this was another Record Store Day release, this time from April of 2022. Though, unlike the Aerosmith record, the cover art for Forest Nocturne was done by Dan Seagrave, whose well-known art has graced the cover of many death metal albums over the decades. So my only complaint here is that there are times when a riff is so often repeated that it's driven into the ground, notably on Left Hand Lullaby Part 2. Speaking of riffs, they do on occasion get a little sloppy, which is made more obvious by some of the single note picking. I get that there's this whole minimalist approach going on here, but sometimes that minimalism is to the album's detriment. Overall, it's not a deal breaker, but it's certainly worth mentioning. As for the vinyl, it is 1 LP transparent blue. There you go. It's considered limited edition, but no numbers available on just how limited it is, which is interesting. As for favorites, Church of Hermann, obviously Bernard Herrmann again, Old Growth, and Triumph of the Oak. I also want to thank Rick over at the Dreadful Minutes YouTube channel for recommending this album to me. Truth be known, this is one of those releases that wouldn't have been on my radar at all, so thank you, Rick. So despite its meager flaws, this is a decent background record, if that's a thing to say. Whether for, again, a Halloween party or simply to have on while relaxing, given its slow and sludgy pace mixed with ambient elements. Again, it's decent, but not mind-blowing. Next month, of course, I go back to metal vinyl hauls for the next 11 months, and then we do this particular format again. Definitely check back in next month for that. Speaking of which, since some of you metal fans out there were patient enough to get through the end of this video, and I do thank you for that, I'll quickly show you 3 albums I'll be discussing in January. They definitely include To the Dead by Exhumed, great album. Also Beyond the Wall by Metallion, and Eclipse of the Dual Moons by High Command. Next month in January, I'll be talking about all 3 of those, plus maybe 5 to 7 more records. You know how it goes. Anyways, if this is your first time here at my channel, my name is Matt. This is the Accusation Network, where each and every week I discuss metal vinyl collecting. I also do videos on classic and modern metal in general. If you like the sound of that, give me a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, and share my videos with some of your friends. Other than that, I definitely thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.